Akai just announced an open beta of MPC 3, a major and free update to the MPC operating system and workflow, available for all their MPC hardware products, including the old MPC Live. MPC 3 includes a massively different home screen or main mode, a new dual contextual channel strip, a new arranger view that lets you see multiple tracks at a time, a new XY pad controller, which is a multi-zone macro control pad, the arranger has a split screen view that lets you both see multiple tracks and edit the details of a single track at once. I'll show you that in a bit. The design of the track and pad mixers has been changed and now looks like a mixer. And plenty of other new things, which I'll cover in this video. Let's get started. Okay, let's start with the main screen or home screen. You can immediately see version 3 is very different from version 2. If you've loaded up a drum track, you'll see a preview of the sample you're playing if the pad is populated. You can zoom in on a sample, edit start and end points if you want right here from the home screen. Of course, all the old editing tools are here as well. While still on the home screen, if you press on the Arrangement tab, you'll see a preview of the MIDI events for that track, or any other track you go to. You can't really see the full arrangement of all the tracks from here, just one track at a time, so it's kind of like a mini grid mode more than a full arrangement view. We'll get to the full arrangement view in a bit. If you load up a drum pad that doesn't have any content on it, you'll be offered to either browse for new content or sample directly into the pad. If you're on tracks that aren't drum tracks, for example, say a plugin track, as usual, you can edit the instrument by tapping here or pressing Program Edit or Edit, and double tapping on the MIDI clip will open up the familiar grid mode for a single track from which you can also get to the arrangement if you want. You'll also notice that the main screen is more colorful than on MPC 2. That's not just because of the new design for the icons, but also because the tracks are color-coded to make them easier to tell apart on the arrangement. And then an important thing you won't see on the main screen is programs, because programs no longer exist in MPC 3. You won't see programs anywhere on the interface unless you own a vintage MPC 1. Programs and tracks have been unified into one. You can't differentiate or separate between the two anymore. And I think that's a very good thing because it makes it way easier for beginners to understand what's going on here. Having programs did give a bit more flexibility, but at the expense of complexity. Now in MPC 3, you choose the track type and you're welcome to load content directly into it. So I can create a new track, choose the track type, let's say plugin, and that plugin is automatically associated with the track without having to go through a program, select a program, and so on. You can always change the track type by long pressing on the number and choosing a different track type. Note that if you load an entire kit into a track, let's say load this one, it will replace whatever was in the track previously. In this case, it was a plugin, but if I browse and load a different kit in, then that's the kit that will occupy this track now, and those samples will be deleted unless when you're in browse mode, you go into settings and don't check clear unused samples on load. If you forgot about that and were browsing and found a kit you really liked, instead of pressing load, you could always press load into new track. So now track 12 will have the acoustic kit, and track 11 will have this one. Now, it should be said that the complexity of programs wasn't without reason. If you wanted to create multiple tracks that use the same kit or plugin preset, and later on adjust those sounds and have that apply to all the tracks that use that plugin, then without programs, you can't do that directly. However, if you want to use the same kit or the same plugin across multiple tracks, you can create a MIDI track and then point that MIDI track to whatever track it is that you want to control. So for example, in this case, these two MIDI tracks use the samples on this track. That's what their MIDI destination is set to. Another use you may have found for programs is once you've put together a beat. And this is a good opportunity to take a look at the updated grid mode, where you can now see pad colors and mute and solo them. Anyway, if once you've finished doing this, you want to split the different pads out to different tracks for separate processing, you just go to main, hit this little pencil, and press explode track. I'll fast forward through this. If we look into the arranger, we can see things have been split up for us. If we go back into main, you can see that each drum now lives on a separate track with groups combined. And they've also been kind enough to mute the original track for us. If you miss programs beyond that, please let me know why in the comment section. Beyond that, another annoyance the main screen got rid of is the need to tab between audio and MIDI tracks and to have those live separately from each other. That's no longer the case. There are no MIDI and audio tabs. When you add a new track, you can add an audio track just as easily as you can any other type of track. And you can also rearrange these tracks. So, for example, I can take this audio track and move it all the way up to, say, here. So now this audio track just lives right next to other types of tracks. Same goes for the arranger. Let's maybe just for fun bounce this entire MIDI track to an audio track. And I'll fast forward through this. You can see that the audio track is right here. I can move that around too if I want. So now it's smack in the middle of the arrangement somewhere right here. Speaking of audio tracks, we can zoom in and out here, see them within the context as a clip in the arrangement, and also double tap to chop or edit the sample here. Of course, any change I make in here will also be visible in this screen. Another thing that has changed on the main screen is the channel strip. Previously, you could only see one channel strip at a time. Now the channel strip is a bit bigger and we can see 2 tracks at a time. The channel strip on the left shows you the current track. And then the one on the right is contextually relevant to whatever we see on the left. So for example, by default, it's this track and the outputs, and you see both, by the way, when this is minimized as well. But if I was to decide to, say, edit the sends for a track, then immediately the return would slide in, the relevant return track would slide in on the right. Or if I was to go into the I/O, then choose a different output, then I would immediately see that different output on the right. Or if I was to choose a submix, then I'd see that on the right channel as well. By default, you see the channel strip for the entire track, but if we hit this little pad here for drum tracks, then now we'll see the strip per pad, and its contextual partner would be the track. The channel strip also gives you direct access to effects. Now you could access the effects page previously, and you can still do that here with this little arrow. But if you like, you can directly add effects into here. So let's say add this. So this also saves a few clicks. A long press, by the way, disables the effect. Then this little icon gives you access to effects racks. So I could say load up an entire rack, and all these effects are loaded up automatically. If you feel like you're going to miss this screen, there is one good use for it now. These new arrows let you reorder the effects. So it's super easy to experiment with the order in effects chains now. The final big thing that has changed on the main screen is that these icons are no longer fixed. They're actually not always there either. So previously you could use them as tabs to access various modes or pages, and you couldn't customize these. Now this list really only exists on the main screen. It doesn't exist, say, for example, on the track list. You see it's gone here. Unlike here, same goes for the step sequencer. You no longer have a shortcut to these tabs here. Rather, these icons are customized using the shortcuts function. So you choose what they are on the menu screen. So say I could choose to move new project into here, and then that's going to be the option here. And then just like on MPC2, wherever else you're at, you can always swipe to see the shortcuts as you could previously. Then before we part ways with the main screen, let's close the channel strip. These icons will change contextually based on the track type you're on. So if you're on an audio track, it'll open up the tuner. And if you're on a melodic track, it will open up Pad Perform. You can also access additional track settings by long pressing here. So not just the track order, but also routing, and most critically, the track color. So that's pretty much it for what's new on the main screen. The top portion deals with the sequence. It's been rearranged a bit, but I think more or less the same. And the sequence is pretty much the arrangement. So let's talk about the arrangement view. You'll be spending a lot of time here, so it's important to know how to get to it. I've customized these buttons so I can access it easily from here. You can also get to it from grid mode. So if you enter grid mode, then you'll always find it here. And remember, it's a little bit confusing. The arrangement tab on the main screen only shows you a snapshot of the current track, not the entire arrangement. So this is the second big thing that's new in MPC 3. And the beauty of the arrangement mode is that for the first time, you can see all your tracks at once in the same place. So you have context for what's going on within your project. You can zoom in and out using the touchscreen or the Q-links. This will reset everything to the defaults. You can obviously play the arrangement from start to finish or set loop points. These, of course, also work with Q-links. Now, to give some context, the arrangement is the same exact thing as sequences were in MPC 2. The only thing is that previously you could only see one grid at a time. So this is track 1, track 2, track 3, and so on. So the arrangement is basically just a sequence. And if we go back into main mode, you can have quite a few of these, quite a few arrangements or sequences. And all the previous functionality of songs and next sequence, all that still works. The difference is that now you just see everything at once, as opposed to a very partial view of what's going on. Let's see what else we can do here. A double tap on a track gives you that same menu that we saw before for reordering tracks and so on. And then a long press will give you another set of options. These will vary based on the track type that you're on. I already showed you can bounce to an audio track. You can also pitch quantize a track if you want to a scale. You can also record directly into the arrangement, whether it's MIDI or audio. So tracking into this works basically like a DAW, where audio and MIDI clips live together in harmony. You've got a few editing functions for the arrangement. These are typically related to the loop. You press edit and you can erase notes in a certain section in the arrangement. So all of these functions are available directly from here. For audio tracks, you can also long press segment and then choose to mute, delete, or even reverse it. And then the arrangement view also has a nice split screen. So if you tap this little arrow, you can slide up this little window, which lets you edit the track individually and edit its automation. So here too, we could add split points, delete portions of the audio, move stuff around. So that's what editing audio tracks looks like. And if we choose a MIDI track, then we'll get our grid with simple grid functionality like dropping notes. You can hit Shift to select all, nudge stuff around, edit start, edit ends. I'm really messing things up here. And like I mentioned, also edit automation for any of the parameters that already exist or any ones that you want to add, including sequence tempo, by the way. But wait, as they say, there's more. You can see not only tracks on the arranger, but also buses. So these are all the submixes, the returns, and the main outputs. Now, why are these here? Well, you could long press to perform a few functions or double tap. But interestingly, you can also use this to program automation for submixes. So for example, edit the track volume, or if I was to add effects to the submixes, we'll get to the track mixer in a bit, but you can also do that from here. So the main screen not only gives you access to regular tracks, but also to the submixes. I could say, go into here, add, let's just choose a delay. And then once this is here, go back to the arrangement, hit add new, and now I have the delays parameters available here. So I could choose feedback or time or whatever else. And then automate that across time. And then one more thing we can do on the arrangement is add locators. So I could move the playhead to wherever I wanted and hold shift and set for one locator. Then maybe let's go somewhere else, shift, set to add a second one, and then just jump between the two. Double tapping here also lets you rename the locators so that they appear on the timeline. Moving on, the next big improvement in MPC3 is the mixers. We finally have mixers that look like mixers. Previously, mixer views didn't look that inviting. It made it slightly more convoluted that you had to go between programs to MIDI tracks, and there are different mixers for each of them, and they're aligned this way, and use the Q links to move between them, but they move up and down, and you can't touch and edit them. You sort of have to select one and edit it that way, or use the Q links. As you can tell, I wasn't a fan. This, I think, is way more intuitive. Programs no longer exist, and audio and MIDI tracks just fit in together nicely wherever they are. You can scroll ahead to see submixes, returns, and outputs. The mixers have a few views, volume on its own, pan and volume. So you can change panning and volume through this, or use the main encoder, or the Q links on a per track basis though, so you don't get to control 4 tracks at a time like you can here. You can hold shift, by the way, and tap a few tracks, then control their levels together. Anyway, you've got the sends. Let's disable this. And then effects controls on any of these pages. You can mute, solo, arm, or arm for writing tracks. You've got I/O controls and settings. And then you also have a pad mixer for drum tracks, of course. So this gives you similar controls for individual pads within a single track. Okay, moving on, let's talk about performance controls. Q links can now behave like macros, meaning control multiple parameters at once, and they've got more control modes. So previously, we had 5 Q link modes. Now we've got 8, including 2 project pages. And if you're missing the program Q links, they're now called track Q links. Anyway, previously, Q links, say for the project, could control only one parameter at a time. This screen has now changed. You can see all the parameters that a Q link controls in here. Let's say go to the project Q link and say choose this one, so I could learn into it any parameter that I'd like. Let's go into program edit and maybe choose, say, level here. Once I turn this, it's been mapped. Let's also add panning and amp attack. As long as this is blinking, we're in MIDI learn mode. Anyway, let's go back to Q link edit, and you can see these 3 parameters have been added, and we now control them with one fell swoop, either permanently or with a momentary control, which means they bounce back when I leave the knob. You can also set ranges and other parameters for each of these. So very cool stuff, macro controls. And then beyond Q links, the XY pads are a very interesting new macro controller in MPC3. Now these shouldn't be confused with the XY effects. So XY effects are just like they were on MPC2, meaning an effect that you can add to the outputs or any other place within the signal chain. What they do is give you XY control over one of several effects options. So it's not a macro per se, it's just an effect with an XY control. And it's the same deal here for XY effects in MPC3. The XY pad, though, is something totally different. So if I go to XY pad, what this does is gives you macro controls for multiple destinations, and you can do that on a per column basis, on X or Y axis, or even on a per row basis. And you need to be out of full screen mode to configure these. So for example, I have previously configured column 8 to control Flex Beat Player on the main outputs, and then column 1 to control a different dry wet control on Flex Beat. And this is a macro, so I could ask it to control anything else that I wanted. Anyway, now I've got this doing one Flex Beat thing, and this doing another Flex Beat thing. So this is a totally new performance and macro controller that opens up quite a few options. It's not multi-touch, by the way, I think. Maybe they can add that because the screen here is multi-touch. But if it were, and even if it isn't, it's kind of like 8 faders, or if you use the rows, something else. Regardless, a fun and interesting global macro controller. You've got 4 of these, by the way. It is a bit convoluted to get to this, so you need to hold Q-Link edit, and then XY pad. Maybe they can add some sort of shortcut to this. Moving on, a few other amenities in MPC3. We now have a pull down menu for various interesting buttons and shortcuts, including learn for the XY pad or the Q-Links. So say if I wanted to learn a Q-Link, I could do it from here. And for something completely different, MPC3 now supports disk streaming. If you enable this, then you can go into your project and choose to have any one of the samples streamed from the hard drive as opposed to in memory. Toggles let you see which samples are in memory and which are set to stream. None are set to that for now. Now you shouldn't do that for the short samples, but if you go to B for bounce, where are you at? Bounce. Here we go. This is the track that I had previously bounced. It's a pretty long sample. It's quiet, by the way, because the beginning is quiet. Anyway, I could long press this and choose stream from disk. It no longer appears in this list, but rather it will be in this one, and its icon has changed to green. Akai recommends you do this mainly for samples that don't need fast triggering, or at least not too many of them, and that you place them on the internal drive or an internal SSD if your MPC supports it. These don't, by the way. And then another cool new feature is slice motion. This lets you take a sample like this one, either rhythmic or melodic, and then you can go ahead and chop that either by threshold or any way you want. The idea is, if you turn on slice mode, that you use a single pad to either play the melody incrementally or just randomly. And you can note repeat this or sequence it, of course. I think it's a fun and generative style feature here to mix things up and keep them interesting. Then a few other small interesting things. You can set a sample to repeat a few times. Loop needs to be on for this. And of course I can trim this. Drum tracks now have 8 layers instead of just 4 on MPC2. If you go into the sound menu, you can now audition kits before deciding to load them. The menu mode now spans more than one page because we've got a few icons here. For example, key ranges no longer lives in sounds, but is rather standalone. And then the looper got an export to audio track option. Currently, this sends audio just to the beginning of the timeline, but I think it would be nice if they could send it, say, to the beginning of a loop point for a more dynamic looping use case. Next, one important thing to note, if you're an MPC software user, Akai isn't currently releasing a version 3 for it. I asked and I was told that it's not slated for 2024, so if you create a project in MPC3, you won't be able to load it into version 2 of the desktop software. You can still use the MPC in controller mode, so if you hook this up to a computer and the MPC desktop software, it will basically look like this. Anyway, for now, if your workflow in any way includes the desktop software, don't create projects using MPC3. Speaking of which, as of the making of this video, MPC3 is only entering open beta. Remember, beta means with bugs, so don't install this if you're not open to experimentation. Otherwise, just wait for the official release. So that's it for MPC3. If you'd like plenty of multi-sampled analog and digital synth instruments for any MPC, check out my Patreon, where you'll also find my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.